Secondly, mutations do not add information to the DNA. Mutations do not add information to the DNA, but this would be necessary if mutations produce new structures. Remember, that's what the evolutionist is suggesting to us. New organs are developing. You're getting animals developing wings and all this, and becoming basically new species, whole new species. Well, mutations don't add information to the DNA, so that's an impossibility. Scientifically impossible. A vast amount of new information would be required to turn a germ into a man. But mutations don't add information. For example, Dr. Ian McCready, professor and researcher down there at RMIT University in Melbourne, he said, but you never see any new information arising in a cell. It's hard to see how any serious scientist could believe that real information can arise just by itself, from nothing. Dr. Lee Spetner, biophysicist who worked at one of the most prestigious universities in the world, said all mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. He wrote this book, Not by Chance, Shattering the Modern Theory of Evolution. He said not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. That surely shows that there are not the millions upon millions the theory demands. We haven't found even one, he says. See, it's just a theory. It's just up in the mind as a possibility, but actual laboratory experiments and conclusions don't show it to be reality. He also said the failure to observe even one mutation that adds information is more than just a failure to find support for the theory. It is evidence against the theory. Werner Arber is a pioneer in DNA research. He received a Nobel Prize in Physiology in 1978 for the discovery of restriction enzymes in DNA. His work in genetics has disproven Darwinian evolution. Of mutations causing evolutionary changes, here's what he has to say. We have in vain spent much time in search for such evolutionary changes. He stated that, quote, the deeper we penetrate in the studies of genetic exchange, the more we discover a multitude of mechanisms, end quote, in human genetics that falsify the mutation plus natural selection core of macroevolution. Arber concludes that the existence of such complex structures as the living cell point to the existence of a creator God. Now, we are all born believing that. Romans chapter 1 says we are all hardwired to believe that. Everybody sees from the creation of the world that we have a very powerful God. Romans chapter 1, just check out verse 18 and 19. We have a God who is very powerful. We know that by default. We have to have someone tell us opposite, and what they're saying is the evidence isn't in their favor. Science, he said, cannot take the place of religion. The million-dollar question then is this: where does genetic information come from? Evolution has no answer. Top geneticists say that it does not come through mutations, and obviously it doesn't come through natural selection, as we saw last time. So the Bible believer has a simple and effective reply which fits all the evidence. The information in the living cell was placed there by the Creator. Each plant, each animal has the exact genetic information needed for its survival and reproduction. There's a certain elasticity within the genetic code to allow the entity to adapt to a changing environment, but there is no change or evolution beyond genetic boundaries. A new icon of evolution by mutation is bacterial resistance to antibiotics. For example, the Staphylococcus bacterium builds resistance to penicillin. This is said to prove that bacteria evolved by adapting to the environment. But there's no addition of genetic information. Elements of the genetic code can be deleted, they can be modified, they can be reshuffled to some degree, but this is not the addition of information that would be required for the evolution of creatures. That is so important that we get that. The Staphylococcus bacterium remains a Staphylococcus bacterium. At the end of the day, it's not changed from one to another. This is another example of the evolutionist's bait and switch tactic. So if you study logic, that's one of the things that people will do on you when they're holding a debate, and there'll be this bait and switch tactic. They use the term evolution to describe simple adaptability within a species, and then they use this to prove that kind-to-kind evolution is possible. Put differently, they use microevolution to prove macroevolution, and that doesn't work, doesn't fit. It's two different worlds. Two major ways that bacteria achieve immunity to antibiotics. First, some bacterium within a certain strain already have immunity. These survive and multiply, while those lacking this immunity die out. There's no real change to the bacterium. The information for immunity is already in its DNA. A few years ago, the bodies of 3 Arctic explorers who died back in 1845 were recovered. And it was found that they had bacteria that were resistant to modern-day antibiotics. That's interesting. So the Staphylococcus bacterium isn't evolving. It's simply responding to the environment of a fallen world with the tools that God gave it. The second way that bacterium gain immunity to antibiotics is by the loss of genetic information. Remember, we quoted Dr. Lee Spettner earlier. He gives the example of bacteria that become immune to streptomycin and by a mutation of the ribosome in its cell. A ribosome is, I had to look it up, it's an intercellular structure made of both RNA and protein, and it's the site of protein synthesis in the cell. So it reads the messenger RNA, the mRNA we've heard all about with COVID. It reads that sequence and it translates the genetic code into a specified string of amino acids. That grows into long chains that hold to form proteins. In case you were wondering, the exam will be after class today. This change prevents the streptomycin molecule from attaching and carrying out its antibiotic function. It turns out that this degradation is a loss of specificity and therefore a loss of information. Evolution cannot be built by accumulating mutations that only degrade specificity. I hope that's making sense. It's taking something that was specific and getting rid of that. It's getting rid of details. That's not going to make evolution occur. So we come back to the million-dollar question. Where does genetic information come from? Evolution has no evidence, no answer. The Bible believer has a simple and effective reply that fits all the evidence. The information in the living cell was placed there by the Creator. We just hold to that by simple faith, and science actually backs that up. Could I say that again? Evolution is not backed up by science, but what is backed up by science is a young earth creation.